to win one of two $250 Prezzy cards each week. So give someone you love a very Merry Christmas.
Are we strong enough? Can we make the cut?
Four Nations, England, PNG and Kiwis Australia. Saturday live, Sky Sport 2.
As Iro comes charging ahead, Iro straight and hard slips the pass away. Tony Iro, will he go himself? He's in! Tony Iro! Tony Iro, no one will get there. Swan went without. Tony Iro with the dummy.
You're about to meet a New Zealander who never really set out to play the game of rugby league professionally, but ended up playing 12 years of the great game of rugby league, including 25 tests for his country. Incredibly, his first test for New Zealand was the 1988 World Cup final at Eden Park, and that came about after only 12 games of top-flight football. The funny thing about Tony Iro was he was almost lost to the game of rugby union.
I was playing union for Tamaki rugby, just as a fullback, not too seriously, but I was enjoying it. And I got selected in an Auckland Colts trial, which, you know, was probably the next step is the Auckland rugby team. And back then, in the late 80s, it was a fairly big decision, like, to go to the league. But in the Colts trial, I didn't make the side. And at that stage, Mike McLennan, who was coaching Mount Albert, and where my brother was playing, he'd already made some, you know, small overtures about me going to play for Mount Albert. And once I didn't get selected for that side, I sort of had nothing to lose. I'd watched Kevin play Australia and beat Australia at Lang Park in '87, so I suppose the seed had sort of been set in my mind that maybe I wanted to give league a go. But definitely in '87 or mid-'87 when I was playing fullback, you know, in Union, I saw myself hopefully one day wearing an All Black jersey, as most kids do.
You played 2 games for Mount Albert under Mike McLennan, and then you end up at Wigan as part of a sweetener deal for your brother Kevin.
Yeah, well, he was only an 18-year-old, and you know, he'll hate me for saying it, but he was a bit of a mummy's boy, or that's what I thought he was anyway.
Because you're the older brother, is that
I'm
correct?
the older brother by a year, so well, just under a year. But you know, I was at university, and you know, as you did when you're a student, you got a bit of spare time in your hands, and Kevin had this offer to go to Wigan. He wasn't that keen to go by himself. He sort of suggested to Graham Lowe, who was a coach over there, that he might want to bring my brother along to sort of give me a shot, and also to help look after him while he's over there. And I think Wigan saw that as a pretty easy deal to do. I don't think they sort of had many plans for me to move on in terms of their team, but Lowy was good enough to give me a shot and pay my airfare over, and you know, as a poor student, I was more than happy to accept. If league didn't work out, I was, you know, going to use it as my base to do my European travels.
So in many ways, you're doing what a lot of young kids are doing now. You're doing it in reverse. You went to England to start your career. What was the game like then?
Well, in my second year, I played 45 games of a league. We had games that were cancelled or postponed because of the frozen field. So, you know, some days, I remember one period we played 7 games in 12 days to catch up on schedule. A lot of difference in the top sides and the bottom sides in the competition. Obviously, playing for Wigan, we were one of the better sides, so we did have some easy wins. But, you know, the sheer toll of you know, 40-plus games a year made it sort of a different experience than what I had in later years in Australia.
Tell me about winning a Challenge Cup.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was my 13th game of rugby league, senior rugby league, so to be in that position's pretty special. You know, the whole family went over. There was still a little bit of dramas with the New Zealand Rugby League at that stage because they wanted a transfer fee that, you know, that I wasn't really prepared to pay, and neither was Wigan. But we managed to sort that out, and I actually had to come back a month before the Challenge Cup and train by myself due to the transfer rules that were in place at the time. So I remember being up at Sacred Heart College just running repetitive 100-metre sprints just to try and keep fit. But, you know, once again, you know, Lowy picked me for that game, and, you know, we won that game fairly convincingly. Great experience. I think it was the last time they got close to 100,000. You know, they changed the seating after that game, and there was 96,000 officially, but I remember they let people in and sit on the track that was running around the outside. So, you know, it was something I'll never forget. Probably the highlight, which was in my first year rugby league of my career. So that was pretty good.
But tremendous play from Wigan now. Bell to Kevin Iro. Kevin Iro's going for that line. He's going to beat Robinson. He's got the size to hold him off, and he's in. Gregory, beautiful ball. What a pass to Tony Iro. He's got to Hanley inside him. He's going all the way. What a try!
Was there always something special about playing with you, bro?
Not really. No, it was nice to have him around. You know, I mean, family's family at the end of the day, and it's nice to be sharing the same thing. I'm sure Mum and Dad and the rest of the family enjoyed us on the pitch together.
Then you come back down under Manly, and Lowy's there, and your whole perspective of the game changes again.
Yeah, well, you know, Lowy had made a decision to go to Australia, and I'd been back in New Zealand with the New Zealand side, and the English game had changed their rules on international players. At that stage we had 4, Kevin, myself, Dean Bell and Adrian Shelford. They changed it to 3. So looking at that quality of players, and me being the novice of the group, I was probably looking down the barrel. They didn't officially tell me so, but as soon as Lowy suggested that I move to Manly with him, I really had no hesitation there. You know, Manly had been through a rough year in '89, but they still had a high quality team.
2 players for me stand out in your time at Manly. The first was Ian Roberts.
I mean, yeah, he was sort of he was a different front rower back then. You know, when you look back at the early '90s and the type of players, the props that were playing then, the Martin Bellas, the Glenn Lazarus types. I mean, those type of players, you know, were still dominating games through their physicality. And Ian brought a different athleticism to that role. And, you know, he was probably significant in the development of the change of the front rower, or the modern day front rower, and turning into a guy who actually used footwork at the line and a bit of skill. So he was an impressive guy and you know, a great person as well.
The other individual has to be Cliffy Lyons. I don't think you can describe Cliffy Lyons, can you?
No, to me he's incomparable. He's the best player I've ever played with in terms of his ability to win football games. Just had the ability to put people in holes or score tries themselves, and you know, he was just so competitive. Didn't matter what you were doing or what you were playing, he had to win. Up till a couple of years ago, he was winning the local Manly championships for his teams while having a smoke at half time, and I think if he was allowed, he probably would have had one at Manly as well. You know, the first thing he did after winning at Manly at Brookvale Oval was grab a ciggy out the back.
How brutal was the game on your body compared to Super League in that first year?
Well, I suppose, you know, when I first started in the NRL, I was still out in the wing, and we could sort of bludge a little bit even back then. You know, it wasn't until coaches got a little bit smarter and the game got a little bit harder that they realised that, you know, they had some big guys out in the centres and the outside backs who could do as much work as a forward. So when you're going from the wing to the second row, and all of a sudden you're making more tackles in one game than you did in the season, you sort of have to, you know, get some priorities in terms of your training and your lifestyle. So I had to work a little bit harder, definitely.
We mustn't pass up the fact that Kevin came down, didn't he? Kevin came down to play for Manly while you were there.
Yeah, he came down in '91. Well, I managed to convince him to come down for a year.
Didn't really fire though, did he?
Well, I don't know. you know, I hear that about Kevin a lot of the time, that, you know, he wasn't a very successful rugby league player, and it always amuses me because he's always named as, you know, one of the top 3 centres that, you know, whoever's ever played against. Kevin's always sort of mentioned. So he probably wasn't as consistent as he would have liked to have been, or as some of the greats in the game. Manly fans will remember it, and Canberra fans will remember it as it was a minor semi-final, knockout semi-final. They played against, you know, Canberra, which were one of the big guns at the time. I think Canberra beat them in the last 5 minutes, you know. But Kevin was outstanding that day. He had high expectations put on, but most highly paid centres do, you know. And if you're not delivering consistently, then, you know, you probably deserve to cop the rap a little bit. But, you know, in terms of his value to the team, I thought he did all right.
Then your nomadic period begins, shall we say. The Roosters and another great coach. What made Phil Gould so special?
Gus had an infatuation with the game. I remember Freddie, when he first moved over from Penrith, Brad Fittler, lived with Gus for a few months and said it was like Gus would be up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning watching videos of rugby league, never slept his whole life. He was always wanting to talk rugby league. He had screeds of paper everywhere, just written team selections and strategies. That was his life, and fortunately for me, he sort of liked my style of play. And I think, you know, when you get a career in whatever sport you are, if you have a coach who can sort of relate to how you play the game or how you would like to play the game, then it's certainly beneficial to your career. And you know, I definitely had my 4 best years at the Roosters under Gus. I had a bit of a role, a genuine leadership role to play there. You know, I'd come to the Roosters where, you know, we had a fairly young team at the start, and, you know, as I said, Gus put a lot of trust in me to sort of help out with his plans and how he wanted the team to go. So in that respect, it was nice to be wanted, I suppose.
You were right in the middle of Super League and you defected to the Hunter Mariners. How did Phil Gould take your defection?
Pretty well, actually. I mean, I had a pretty strong relationship with Gus, as I said, and you know, being at the Roosters, I was sort of in the bunker of the ARL. But once again, you know, Graham Lowe's had a bit of an influence on my career, my life. He was working for Super League, offered me a deal, and I took it.
The weird thing about going to Super League, though, is where you were going to enemy territory twice because you went to play for Hunter in the same town as Newcastle. What was that like?
That was an interesting experience, but looking back now, it was just what we needed to actually galvanise the team. As I said, you know, we were players from all over the eastern seaboard being brought together in a hostile ARL territory, and we had some interesting comments when we first got there. But you know, as I said, we had to stick together, and that's what we did. And we had a pretty successful year up there. You know, we made the World Club final, played here at Mount Smart, played the Broncos, who were too good for us on the night, but that was a massive achievement. You know, we had to beat Wigan at Wigan to make it, beat Cronulla at Cronulla. So once the general population realised that we were just rugby league players at the same time, then, you know, it slowly turned. The fact that they could now watch 2 rugby league teams in their town meant that, you know, we were basically getting 8, 9, 10,000 to our games by the end of the year. So, you know, we'd sort of won them over a little bit.
So Super League lasts a year, it's all over, but your journey continues. This time it's Adelaide.
Yeah, well, once the ARL and News Limited got together and decided, you know, they're going to cull a few teams, obviously there wasn't not enough room for 2 sides in Newcastle, so they called us into a meeting, and we had representatives from the other Super League clubs, but, you know, we were sort of politely told where we should be going in no uncertain terms. I sort of figured it was going to be my last year of football anyway, so we went down there and had a great year, much like Newcastle, without the sort of animosity. We're you know, a small team in a big town, dominated by Aussie rules.
From Adelaide, and one more stop, as it would turn out, and that would be South Sydney.
I was with the New Zealand side in England for the 98 tour, and the Adelaide boys had actually all started their pre-season training while we were playing test matches in England, and before you know it, I get a few phone calls saying that Adelaide's been kicked out of the comp. By all people from Terry Hermanson who just joined the Rams as well. So, you know, a couple of days later, I got another phone call. It was from Craig Coleman, the South Sydney coach, asking if I'd be interested in helping them out in the following year. And at that stage, Phil Gould had been acting as a bit of a technical advisor for the Rabbitohs. So on his advice, he suggested that they try and get me to help the south side. So yeah, I had no hesitations in going there either. You know, I suppose I'd known Craig socially and got on well with him, and you know, I really respected and liked the guy, and the fact that sort of Gus was in the background as well, helping things out, I thought, you know, they might be able to turn the Rabbitohs around a little bit. And to some extent, you know, we had a good year. I think we finished 11th out of 16 or 17 teams, whatever they had back then, which was a vast improvement of what they'd had previously. But unfortunately, it was only to last a year.
And that was the last year the South won the comp before they were booted out as well.
Yeah, well, we trained. I'd actually signed on again for the year 2000, and we started our pre-season training, still not knowing whether we were in the comp, because at that stage they were trying to kick South out. So it was a funny time. We used to train in the mornings and then head to the High Court in the afternoons en masse as a team. So that was an interesting situation, and unfortunately, you know, George Piggins and the rest of the South faithful were disappointed when we were left out of the competition. So at that stage, you know, even though I'd trained and could have played that year, I decided, you know, I'd got rid of 3 clubs in 3 years. Three clubs have been kicked out of the comp. I didn't want to be responsible for a 4th one, so I called it quits.
What's it like to call time on your pro career?
When you never expect to be a professional footballer, then whatever you get, you just accept and be grateful for it. And I've always had that. That's always been me. And to have 12 years in a game which I loved and, you know, which I really enjoyed and had the best of times, well, you can't ask for more than that. So I had no regrets of hanging up the boots. Now, the only thing, you know, you speak to all the old players, the only thing they miss is that buzz of running out onto big crowds and playing footy. But those 400-metre training laps and getting up Monday mornings, you can have that.
We must talk about your Kiwis career. When did you first learn about your selection for the World Cup?
I basically got picked for the 88 World Cup final. That was my first test match. He'll correct me because I might be wrong, but I think on the recommendation of Dean Bell. Because obviously the New Zealand selectors sort of, you know, I hadn't been on the scene long. I hadn't really done much. And a bit of a new face on the block. So to be selected for like a World Cup final was a massive surprise for me. And, you know, although the result didn't turn out as we expected, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I was basically playing with guys who I had idolised through my younger years, Kurt Sorensen and Shane Cooper and Clayton Friend, Mark Graham, you know, Sam Stewart, Hugh McGahn. I wasn't ready for that game. I just walked around in the daze for 7 days, and, you know, if I had my autograph book, I would have spent my time chasing these blokes for names. But I fully enjoyed the experience. Managed to score a try as well, which sort of made up a little bit. And more importantly, I broke Wally Lewis's arm when he tried to tackle me. So there was a few highlights coming out of the game. But
there was real sort of backlash from the public on that game, wasn't there? Because everybody expected the Kiwis to roll the Kangaroos.
I think at that stage we had 6 NRL captains playing for the New Zealand side, and as well as Dean Bell, who was captain of Wigan at the time, you know, we had a fair amount of leadership in that team. But, you know, they just outsmarted us on the day. I mean, there's no other word for it. They outsmarted us, and they did a job on us. And you got to give them credit. You know, they went into the side as underdogs and played on it. You know, I suppose, you know, looking back now, as a junior member of the team, you know, I wasn't in any position to, you know, sort of challenge or anything. But, you know, having that many captains in the side was probably detrimental in the end.
What was it like to play for your country? You played 25 tests. Was it special every time you put on the jersey because you were going in to meet a group of familiar friends, that dare I say it, that brotherhood?
When we used to hear our names called on the radio, and it didn't matter whether it was your first or your 10th or your 20th, the butterflies just started an hour from when it was going to be announced. Because, you know, to pull on the black jersey is like there's nothing better than it. Doesn't matter who you're playing. The fact that you're representing your country is, like, I wouldn't care if we were playing Guatemala in rugby league. You know, we were wearing the black jersey, and it was just a proud moment, just to pull it on. You know, I could have slept in it if it wasn't so embarrassing for my roommate. So.
Logan Swan went without. Tony Iro with the dummy. Get everybody. Kearney. Jones gets another one in. They will party all night long.
We played the Australians in the '88 World Cup final. The next time I beat them was in '97. So I had
the Super League one.
I had to wait 10 years to beat the Australians in a Test match. I'd missed a couple of wins during that time because of injury. I did my knee in '91 where they won that famous game in Melbourne, so I wasn't available for that game. But in '97 when we played the Super League, there was a talk that it wasn't a weakened Australian side. That's why. So to get them again in '98 and North Harbour again, where they had everyone to pick from, and the main player there, they had Andrew Johns playing halfback, so they basically considered to be unbeatable, and this was the day they'd get their revenge. To beat them again that day, those 2 years were massive highlights, and it was a great way. 98 ended up being my last year as a Kiwi player, so to get them at their top two was especially satisfying.
Now you're about to give back to the game. It's now Tony Iro, the coach, and you've been coached by some magnificent coaches, Phil Gould, Bozo Fulton, Frank Endicott, Graham Lowe. Will you use their lessons to make you a better coach?
Yeah, I always love this giving back to the game, because I still feel the game's giving to me. I obviously feel very privileged to be coaching the Warriors 20 side. Obviously I haven't had a lot of experience in the coaching game. I don't profess I'm ever going to be a Phil Gould, a Graham Murray, a Bob Fulton. But hopefully I've learnt enough over those 12 years with those number of coaches that I can pull a little bit out of all of them, because they all had different styles, and I think that's the main thing. Like Ivan Cleary now at the Warriors. I mean, he's a unique coach. I've never experienced a coach like Ivan. He's the most unflappable guy you'd ever meet, and the way he teaches the game is a lot different than those other coaches. So everyone's got their own style, and I think you've just got to be, I suppose it's an old saying, but you can't try and be someone else. You've just got to try and be yourself, and the biggest thing is, I suppose, you've just got to enjoy it.
You're not really that intense, are you? I can't see you being an extremely intense coach.
I don't think so, but having said that, I haven't lost 5 games in a row. So, when that time comes, or if it does come, I'm pretty sure, the sweat will be pouring down my head, and if I only had any hair, it'd be going grey. But, I think I've always been a fairly relaxed person. To me, a relaxed coach hopefully means a relaxed team. And I think footballers are better when they're like that. I've got a lot of trust in my boys to work as hard as they can and be the best that they can. So we'll just do our best and see what happens. It's going to be an interesting year.
I want you to take out the friends and experiences of 12 years in the game of rugby league as a player and tell me what in rugby league made Tony Iro.
Boy, it's a tough one, because friendships are such a big part of the game, and that brotherhood. It's such a gladiatorial game that if you take your mates away from it, there's not much else. There's always a great satisfaction of doing a job with a group of blokes who share the same ideals. And I suppose, if you want to teach your kids something, it's not to ever give up. and work to a common goal and just stick at it. Yeah, I've had too much fun. I can't take those things away, those things out of the game, because that's what it was about for me. You know, if you didn't have your friendships and your mateship and that doing things together, then I'm not sure you'd want to do it.
Nine